Pretty cool, right?
Yeah.
What a way to start off a new company. So my name's Joe Mayoki. I'm the COO of RocketRide. We've just started off this week, and we're here to share with you guys some cool developments that we have and what we're going to be doing to help the open source community. To start with, I wanted to ask a few questions. So first of all, in this audience, the Steam developers and technical people, how many people here are currently working on some sort of a KI project? All right, quite a few. Okay, I'd like to kind of see what kind of development environments you guys are using. So we have a poll. Yeah, put it up, put both of those up. And so please scan this QR code and tell us what IDE you're using. And some of you, it might be other, that's fine. But we'll just run this real quick. I want to get a sense from the room of what people are using today. I know there's more than 7 people using development tools in this room. All right, so the idea here, as you guys fill that out, is we're building a plugin to developer tools, the tools you already use. That's why that statement was up there. Your IDE is the new AI command center. We're trying to help developers use their own tools to be more productive. Okay, so yeah, we've got a lot of VS Coders here. One more question. How many people have challenges in any sort of challenge building their AI applications? Okay, quite a few. All right, great. All right, well, that makes sense. I want to go ahead and make a couple housekeeping announcements. So we're going to start with a panel discussion. Then we're going to have our CEO come up and give a quick intro to our company, followed by a couple of demos. And at that point, we're going to serve you guys a really cool dinner. There's going to be 3 different demo stations throughout the hall where you get to actually see more in-depth how our product works, and it's very flexible, can be used for a lot of different purposes, but also you can get your hands on it and try it out. And lastly, of course, you can use that time to network as well. So that, we'll try to keep this moving along and definitely get you guys fed on time. So let's go ahead and introduce our panelists. So first I'd like to call up Rod Christensen. Hey, Rod. So Rod is our chief architect at RocketRide, and I think that's all you can do. All right, the next person I'd like to call up is Alexei Karbarov. Former OSS scientist and is currently leading AI by the Bay and has a couple of foundations. Next up is Hendrik Krak, the developer advocate at CodeRabbit, and we've so many worked together as well. And finally, Edward Irby. He's from U.com, software engineer at U.com, and he's up in Portland. All right, so hey guys, let's go ahead and get started. So Alexei, been reading your Reliable Agentic AI manifesto, and you talk a lot about observability. So how important and why is it critical for developer tooling to get the observability when building agentic workflows?
Well, so I'll mention one number. I heard Ian Stoica mentioned recently, right? So Reliable AI manifesto we started in May last year. It's actually amazing. It was going to be a year with industry leaders in distributed systems such as Aka and Sprague, so Jonas Bonero, Johnson, sort of folks who build the large distributed systems and understand, right, what observability, traceability means. A lot of folks who build agentic distributed systems kind of, whereas like AI is tip of the iceberg, a lot of it is actually it. Lower part of the iceberg is the distributed systems, and we kind of built that for 20 years, and they're hard for a reason, right? And so he started giving these talks about August last year, and he had this slide where he mentioned that 70% of multi-agentic AI systems fail, right? And it's kind of now redundant because agentic systems are multi-agentic systems. So what it means that 70% of the systems we don't really know what's going on. It's very hard because it's asynchronous. Agents that do different things. The topologies may differ, and effectively, it's very hard to understand if you have a failure. What is the sequence of events that has led to a failure? Because no, it's not just a deterministic, right? Like call graph is a kind of static program. It's something that was caused by decisions which these agents made. Sometimes this agent lost its end user, something else that went out and did the web search, right? So something happened there. So I think this is extremely hard, and I think it's hard for two reasons. One is that like the systems are new, that there's this planning decision making stage, but also I think a lot of folks kind of ran and rushed into this kind of building this agentic stacks. They did not think through how we actually consider this a distributed system, right? The fact that it's a distributed system almost like a slap on, right? Like it started as a Pythonic, program, and then like, okay, like how do we very quickly scale it up? So then like a bunch of frameworks came up in Python, which were not battle classic as JVM, and did not come with this character traceability. So I think it's very important to kind of think, how can we understand what's going on? Otherwise, when we're gonna deploy these things reliably.
Anybody on the panel have any ideas on how we're tackling this problem today?
Yeah, I mean, I can speak a bit to that for sure. I think it's a very important point you mentioned, and there's companies obviously built around this, like Arise, like LangGraph, LangChain, all that entire series. A lot of people paying a lot of attention to that. In the end, you're right. I think that the tooling might be there. It doesn't necessarily mean that people still understand how to build those systems. In the end, it trickles down if you really understand it, if you can really, at least that's what I'm seeing, and CodeRabbit can really understand how to navigate and each single decision an agent makes. So even if you have 99.9 accuracy in one of your, or each of your agent systems, if one of them is not as accurate, then it always triggers down in the system. So that's where you see the failure coming from, right? Be interesting to see how you solve that with RocketRide. For sure, I think there's many approaches. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, the way we're solving it when we're doing analysis is how agents use our APIs at Redo.com is we built an agent evaluation suite. So whether we're testing search queries or code generation, or which is I've been doing on lately, evaluating the skills, what I'm doing is I'm taking example prompts and then I'm running them through a evaluation suite that does inline grading. What that means is that I'm looking at the generative output. I'm actually executing predetermined Python tests, not the test that I wrote myself, but the test that the agent is generating, or a TypeScript test. Looking at the STDI output, comparing the trajectories, comparing the actual output, and having an LLM judge both those outputs, but also I have scripts that run, deterministic scripts that run as part of that process that actually assess what tool calls were made in trajectories, what the failure rates were for the agent, whether it went out and decided to use a tool I didn't expect. And because I'm capturing all that JSON files, I can actually run analysis over that. And by running 5 to 10 trials, I can start making real assessments about the capabilities of my agent and how well it's going to work at P90, P99 points.
So I think one of the biggest problems that we have is observability at this point in time, Joe. In the times that we just had, the simple RAG pipelines where they chunk it up, embed it, and you stick it in the vector database, problems were very easy to find. Nowadays, with agents, agentic technology, and MCP servers all over twice, agents within ages, observability and reliability becomes key. How many times if I look at this pipeline, it's like, I have not for, right? And that was the biggest problem that we have today, I think, to actually producing correct, reliable, 100%, accurate pipelines is observability. Because if you don't know what's going on inside, it can't justify what's going on inside, you have no clue as how to keep and maintain that. And in addition to that, when one aspect changes, a model changes or, an MCP server changes or AD guys, how you actually find that, it's 3 levels deep and we don't even know what it's doing. Observability in the future is going to be the key to actually maintaining and deploying reliable pipelines.
Yeah, I think almost you're opening up a religious divide, I think, to a certain extent, because if you look at the birth of all the vibe coding tools, and I think we'll get into that soon enough, right? It doesn't really seem like observability it comes to is first of concern. Like and Conrad, you were just talking before I was at this event that was called Claude's Code birthday party about 2 weekends ago by Fropic, and they held a hackathon with I think people from all around the world, and everybody could submit their project. It was very, very cool for the launch of Opus 4.6, very powerful model. And the winner was actually a lawyer. He built this really, really cool app that helps people in California basically help get housing permits faster, as apparently it's a nightmare. But obviously, you didn't have a technical background. So while this application was very powerful, most of the observability, you could say, is kind of like a second nature concern. Yet if somebody was to productionize that application, they would probably have a very hard time fighting this. So I think you also have to make the divide in the story to where RocketRide or better observability tools fit into this entire vibe coding or agentic engineering stack that other people are building now. I think that's going to be a crucial point.
No, I think this is a good segue because you talk about its multi-agent usage instead of just being proprietary one tool, right? And that's where you need something that crosses over. So how important, Rod, is it to find a way to abstract away the differences between these tools, the connectivity, the handoffs, in order to build some sort of common observability or debugging or just composition?
So I'll give you a little hint on my journey on how I got into AI and how we actually did up here today. We had a product about lobby to process data, and it was actually send it through a pipeline, the everything was fine. And I started out with Haystack, okay, as the primer. And Haystack was, great product, and then after about a month and a half, oops, it doesn't do this. Okay, so then back to square one. Okay, so then actually LangChain. Okay, and then I get all the way through LangChain, and these were the early days of AI. Okay, so you have to understand this is like, version 2, 2 or something. So the thing is we need to not only abstract the model, but we also need to abstract the underlying architecture of how use models and use frameworks fit together. If we can create a unified API across the top of these models, that it doesn't matter whether we're using LangChain, it doesn't matter if we're using Haystack, it doesn't matter if we're using OpenAI or Claude, it doesn't matter if we're using Crew AI or Deep Agentic or LangGraph, it doesn't matter, because then once you create that abstract API up on the top, you can take this box out and swap it with this agent, and everything around it still works. That's why it's very, very important to utilize those boxes in that extraction, because then you don't have to worry about the underlying comment. Did that answer your question?
It's your perspective, yeah.
Okay, my friend. What do you face in that?
Anybody disagree?
I don't think the abstraction thing is gonna necessarily, it's a good approach, and I definitely use abstraction when I do evaluations where I take different coding agents, I have my tool build JSON schemas to take their inputs and then normalize their outputs when I'm evaluating them. But one of the things that I'm leaning more into is that as I use these tools more, I find myself building on-the-fly scripts with tests that do what I want. And if I extrapolate that out to the idea of a semi-technical person who's building out their own tool set, they're not going to be using these frameworks. They're not going to be using LangChain. They're not going to be using Crew AI. They're going to be using some type of general purpose agent and building scripts on the fly for what they need. And so observability becomes a very different question then. And it becomes how do you evaluate whether like the project you were talking about, which I read about actually yesterday, how do you know this works well? You know it works well through looking at the logs it's outputting. Well, how do you design something to look at those logs, depending on what agent the guy is? Well, you have to build something that can actually capture that. It's going to use a slightly different schema. You can try and normalize that, but you can also try and create a harness, which I think is, we're not in a completely different place, but realize that like these aren't always going to output the same information. I know that Droid outputs data one way, and I know that Claude Code does it another way. And then I also know that Gemini hides its tool calls around search and doesn't automatically preferences itself no matter what you do. So normalization becomes a lot harder when you start working through different agents, not even considering different models. And so the question is like, what you have to do is observe like the outputs. And what you have to observe is those things that we already know how to do very well. Test outputs, linting, formatting, file generation, and assessing it from that point of view. Real-time observability is something where these agents are doing so much that there is no easy way for the human mind to like hold that and observe that. And so we need a different type of abstraction model, which I don't think is going to be like a pure normalization. It has to be like, what is it we're trying to observe? And for me, it's the desired outcome. And then there is setting up guidelines around things that I'm familiar with, security, stability, style. But that's just where I'm at with it.
I actually have a counter question. What do you think about the latest approach from Cursor? Then, it's kind of review by proof. You see it more and more, you send your agent off, and then it comes back with a video to show you the outcome that you just talked about.
I haven't actually tried it.
I skimmed over it. I think it's pretty similar to something I already do, where like I'll write a skill and then I'll like that's designed to generate code and tests, and then like what I'm doing is running an evaluation, see like did it do it, and I'm doing that through using LLMs as a judge as deterministic analysis. I think a video is great because Cursor is really great for front-end development, and so review by proof works. But then what you're missing like things like the person who accidentally commits a secret to the front-end code, the person who because the agent site that was the easiest way to do that. And so unless you built up tooling that like calls on like an API from like Sync or something, that's gonna be like security scanning what the agent does, it's not gonna you're not gonna know enough. And so you have to make sure those type of tools are integrated to the flow. Now, maybe that's integrated to review by proof. I don't know because I haven't looked right into it. But I think that as somebody's like built things for like over a decade, like 15 years now, I'm like, no, there are tools that I use that evaluate how safe something is. There's tools that I use that evaluate like whether or not I've accidentally committed a secret and I've got to like force push over it if it's a private repo, or be like, oops, blow that up, because I don't want that in my Git history. Like, those are things that I think the video is great, but it's the underlying analysis you get. So if we look at like what Rosell did with their skills.sh website, they're still working on it, but you can immediately look at any skill and see 3 different types of security scanners that are telling you about what the skill is doing. They're using a mixture of deterministic and model analysis. That's the type of observability that I really want when I'm looking at like just in addition to a video speech. Like I want somebody's going to judge what I get, just like when I do a PR review at Cursor gives me or that type of review. I need that plus a video to feel any sort of certainty about this probably isn't going to screw me or someone else over.
That's fair. I mean, I think not to make this a one-way discussion here, but I think there is different levels to this, right? You're going very much into the skill. For example, take a Seabird example. We had GitX for a while now, static analysis tools that help us analyze these type of things. I think what Rod is building when we're looking at is like more of a visual understanding. What does this code actually do? And I feel like that still has a place, even though you can talk about certain things. But how do you feel about the visual part? If that's something that, for example, myself SSH is not really looking into, I feel like right now.
I know. I think the visual is the very important part. It's the part that most non-technical or semi-technical people care about. It's the part that I care about in my own personal work. But I think that alone creates a shaky foundation if you don't have the like tools that we've had for a while now. And the problem is that I think the problem we've got to address is how do you take people who are now, for all intents and purposes, becoming like project managers of technical executions and give them the visual part, which is what we care about. It's while also like giving them some assurity around the technical foundation and letting them know like this is actually good. And like we don't have great tools for that yet. We have our usual deterministic tools, and we're building better LLM-based tools. But there has to be some type of education that goes into doing that. Just like you know not to do certain things in Excel, you should know not to do certain things with your agents, and we don't have that type of abstraction, that type of language yet.
Maybe I'll add one thing. So when you said, your example, like the lawyer won the hackathon with his, average makes a housing pyramid. And you don't need observability because you can eyeball the pyramid, right? Which is fine. However, I talked to a startup, consider this, right? Their anode is in financial services, right? And so they deal with the major bank, the national bank, right? With millions of customers. And so the problem is there, it's not something you can eyeball. Let's say an account changes status. Legally, you have to touch 40 different systems inside the bank for compliance purposes. And if you miss one of them, you will be legally liable, right? So this is where observability comes into play, because if you do not have observability, that simple change of status, the client comes in, changes the account status. Behind the scenes, like 40 different weird things in the bank, like it's like a turnover log, like this is a 40-year-old system, so they're mainframes, like that's the clanging it off, hello, and your agents, right, now you slap the agentic system on top of it, they kind of do this kind of very cool thing for the customer through the startup, API and MCP. However, what has to happen in the bank, eventually, all these agents need to cause 40 different systems to update, and there should be proof. So there is no way, first of all, you cannot put this in production without very, foundational observability. Second thing, abstractions, right? I think you have to have abstractions for the simple reason that you have multi-generic systems of different companies, which need to talk to each other, right? So actually I have a question for the audience. Who builds a system with agents from different frameworks? Like, let's say LangChain and QAI, or like Google agents, OpenAI agents. Who has actually a system in production with truly diverse agents talking to each other? Anybody? So this is very hard. We're not there yet, right? It's very aspirational. We talk about this, world of agents. Currently, we just take one thing, we'll run it locally. Like people run it on a laptop, maybe we'll run it in a company. All these agents are the same. If we are to arrive in the world where there are multiple agents from different companies talking to each other, we have to agree on the standards. We have to agree on the protocols, right? Currently we're using MCP, A2A. All these things are abstractions. Like we have to standardize on ways things talk to each other, and of course they will have to come with observability, so we know what they're talking about. And I think people are innovating in this space. So it's just to put.
But even extrapolating or actually narrowing it down, when you just asked that question, you were thinking in terms of different entities having different agent frameworks talking to each other. But what about within your single workflow? Don't you want to use the best of breed for the different pieces of the problem that you're solving? And why would you have to be locked into one framework? If there's a framework out there that can do this piece better, why not be able to use that very easily without having to worry about the interactions at the micro scale?
100%. And I want to use the do the job, right? So like different frameworks for different strengths. These are problem spaces, go big or different frameworks.
With abstraction and observability, and you'll see a demo tonight on this, you can actually compare the outputs of 4 different LLMs. You can actually put in a couple different agent frameworks and actually determine which one is actually going to be better for you in your particular use case. So you not only have to trust and write the code on the crew AI is going to work for you at some point in time, figure out, oh my goodness, 3 weeks into your project, it doesn't work as well, and let's try something else. And then you're another 3 weeks into that. What you can do is you can specifically with extractions, you can actually step side by side every agent and see exactly how they react to the inputs, the exact same inputs, look at the outputs with the observability, and not suppose or actually prove which one is better in an objective,
It sounds a little like you're referring to more of the discovery build phase, right? Because you're actually trying to figure out what you want to use. I'm curious, between the discovery piece and the stitching together of these different tools, how much repetitive wasted time are developers spending in these areas instead of building the actual workflow application with the value, the business value that they're actually trying to build? I mean, what's your experience?
It's huge. I mean, just learning the front-end framework, learning how through AI works to prove that it's better than LangChain, or better than LangGraph, or better than debate agentic. You know, just learning all these different things is a huge investment, right? And unless it's seriously broke, you don't make that investment. Like, I don't learn about through AI unless my existing agentic technology is not working. So it really is. And what is good enough and what is bad enough to force me to look at another framework to see if it's better and make that investment, because it is so paid for.
You know, it's funny, I've been LangChain at the Rock conference last spring, and so there were Capital One, I think, and others giving talks, and they basically said, how did we choose LangChain? Because it's a legacy. It's a legacy agentic framework, right? Because it's the oldest one. And so, it's what's interesting, I also talked to some startups, so they have 50 Gen AI startups banging, like not enterprise, have 50 Gen AI startups banging their doors. There is no way they can evaluate 50 startups, right? Like, there's just no way. They're totally lost. Like, somebody should build a startup to evaluate 50 Gen AI startups. If you guys can build one and sell it to the enterprise, that can be amazing, right? Because this is the real problem. You have all these multiple frameworks, and people just basically pick one because they heard about it, you know, that maybe an incumbent, maybe like Shaper because it has the most stars. It's the most stars, right? Like, and so, but I think it's a real problem, right? Like, we often do not have the means and the tools and motivation and the time. And so we kind of stick around. And these frameworks, by the way, they have kind of built-in decisions. So they have state machines, for instance. So I run this AI agent SF meetup. Friday the 13th of March, we're going to have OpenClaw committers, you know, coming in and talking. And there'll be like yet another agentic framework which has totally new mechanism, like non-deterministic, no state machine, every agent can chat to each other. Like, people are coming up with these things all the time, and we will see them, like new paradigms of agentic frameworks coming, and we need to figure out how to evaluate that.
I think I want to step back to your comment about banks. All of these frameworks kind of work on the idea of they expose tools to whatever your prompt is, and they control the agent loop for you. And so they're very much based on almost pure generative output and relying on the model for its inference calls. I'm not saying that doesn't work. It does. You can evaluate, figure out how to like give it the right tools, give it the right context and system prompts. But it ignores like all the other work that we've done as engineers over the decades. Like, there is nothing that prevents you from like stepping back and looking at the event log of these tools and then building logic around that framework or building your own tooling. However you want. I'm not saying go build your own framework. I'm saying, like, me personally, the reason I don't use any of these tools outside of like building integrations for them for my company is because I'm highly invested in taking a neurosymbolic approach to how I design my agents. I'm not going to rely solely on generative outputs. I'm going to use a mix of like memory or context management through a neurosymbolic approach, where I'm taking a very simple algorithm that allows me to capture that event log you're talking about, from like the initial user event passed through my WebSocket connection down to my model. There's not a single event that happens that's triggered. And it's using a very simple approach where I capture all of that. And then I can recursively feed that back into it, control semantic search around and to full text search around what I bring back into the model using a recursive approach by having basic semi-deterministic symbolic rules around invocation and what tools are allowed or not used. And you can capture that if you actually tune a model to do tool calling. And so a model will, if you train your model to actually go ahead and do it a write action versus a read action, you can make an immediate decision about whether or not you need to do a recursive loop back into the model with rules around what you're doing, because you're observing the actual flow of events as they're coming through. You're observing the tool choice that the model is making. It makes it easy for you to actually bring that back, do another loop through the model, and get a better output. And the thing is, like, how you surface that event log up to the user in a meaningful way. And I think that's where good abstractions make sense. But we actually know how to do a lot of this stuff. We're just not doing it because people are like, hey, I give it a prompt, it outputs something, or it calls tools. We can't ignore basic engineering. And so it's like going out and relying on those algorithms that taught us how to use state machines or use event logs, or in my case, behavioral programming. I'm not gonna say simplifies things, but it forces us to get back to engineering.
Well said. I feel like we're diverting a little bit from topic, but now we're talking more about like context engineering, which I think is one of the biggest paradigms for building really good agentic systems is managing the context, not the standing when another LLM makes the right call or does not make the call. We have an overflow with the right information to get a quality output. I wonder how like you tie that best into with when you mean like what is a good output for you, because there's different qualities, right, between what your system can output, whether it's a deterministic decision or whether, for example, it's a code review, which can be about explaining a bug, but can also be about how to deploy a new fix, or as well as like a qualitative assessment about how well something has been implemented. And I think there's just a variance, which is kind of more like a spectrum less than just good or bad.
I think there is a variance there, but I also think that before LLMs, you probably got into fights with your coworkers around linting rules, around formatting rules, around tabs or spaces. We have tools for all of those things. When I do my agentic dev setup, when I set up my GitHub CI workflows, I have skills, I have prompts that say, you're using this, you're using that. If there's a tool that already exists, I don't go ahead and like offload it to like a GitHub action, the new GitHub actions where you're like, hey, this is my style. No, like I use a tool. It's for those things that can be easily captured with like a danger file, or can be easily captured with like a linter or a test run. That's when I lean hard into like bringing in more generative capabilities into my overall testing, evaluation of work and linting pipeline. It's about finding the right balance, like leaning into when you want the generative outputs, but then feeding the outputs of your tests, your lints, your danger files back into the model when it's actually doing a code review. So like when I run my cloud code review, I have it actually looking at all of those outputs. And because I have patterns about how I want code written, it's looking at that too. Like I don't pretend that doesn't exist. I just make it aware of it and make it part of the overall system prompt for those code reviews.
You're opening up a bottle here. I'll leave it you back to Joe, but I'll talk later.
I want to ask the completely separate question now. Edward, I'll ask you, how do you handle dependency management for all these different tools that you're stitching together in some workflow?
With tears mostly. But in all honesty, for me, I've gotten pretty good at using the models themselves to generate, because I'm lazy, GitHub workflows that literally check dependency management weekly. So I have like workflows that run like that verify my skills are still working, workflows that run that verify like they're looking for dependencies and doing upgrades to see if it works. And depending on what the project is, how like important it is. So for some of our internal repos, I will run those more often because I need this always to be working. But yeah, turns out models are really good at generating GitHub actions, and you can make actions for almost anything to help you stay on top of things. Send reminders to remind you about dependency management when you're writing updates in a mono repo. All of those things are things that I've set up now at this point.
I'd like to hear from everybody else. It's kind of a general question. How are you handling dependency management?
Well, I could talk to CodeRider. I think we just released a really full feature, actually that goes down that line, which is multi-repo analysis. So now you can, when you use run CodeRider, it does not only look into the repository that it's the one that you had it installed on, but it looks into all other repositories, including also doing web search for the libraries. So basically, to your point, I challenge you on your cloud code review, because I think there might be some improvements you can do in your context management. We use call graphs that we designed. We use abstraction that we traverse the syntax tree. Some very, very elaborate static tools.
then find out where libraries are touched, and then use agents also to do web search and figure out if these libraries are up to date or not. And that goes past your own repository, but also to maybe you have your front end in one repository and your back end in another. If you change an API in the front end and something in the back end is not built out for that yet, we'll find that, and then we'll call your other repository as well and put that.
You just gave me an idea of how I can improve what I already do. So like I see Claude Code Review made very, very clear. It is doing review, but I have also built Claude Code's TypeScript LSP was crap, but again, inspired me to actually create a skill and a CLI utility for that. So when my reviews run, it's actually using my TypeScript LSP tool to crawl over the changes I'm making. But what I realized is like I work for U.com. We have a search API. We've got this really great research API. I could totally like combine, change my system instruction, my prompt instructions for review to like not just use my TypeScript LSP tool, but also to do research, do the web search and research around what's being used. And so I'm gonna totally add that now.
You're basically going on the path with Peter Steinberg already. He swears I'm using only CLI tools instead of FCPs. He's not.
What I say?
I mean, I'm pretty old school, right? So like, I don't want really random, engine to drag and random crap and like random libraries and security risks. So, I basically have very traditional, setup. And also, I like to minimize dependencies, right? Like basically, a lot of time you don't need to drag in a bunch of different, little libraries. So you actually can consciously say, like, I don't want a bunch of dependencies. I want to minimize them. And for now, you can implement a bunch of things actually in your code. And I'm actually looking carefully at and depending on the programming language, like the requirements file. So I'm pretty paranoid about it. I don't really want random dependencies, random agents to like dragging random dependencies is a recipe for disaster. Again, like that comes from an enterprise context. You don't generally, right, want this to happen. And again, like just for reference, I was really amazed that in a bank, you cannot, if you're a JVM, you cannot just run something like maven install and like drag in a bunch of jars. Security in a bank still looks at the job, or like they will not let you to bring in random crap because that can be, a Trojan or something like this. So there are very different setups depending on where you are, right? Like again, and depends on the app, depends on the context. But generally, I think dependence is a very serious issue. You have to understand where they're coming from. You have to understand the chain of provenance, right? And have to have pretty good idea what's going on in your office.
Nothing to add.
Edward has.
I was gonna say, so I just have a question for you. So you're using these tools, right? And so I agree with you about not having a lot of dependencies, but one thing I found that like a thing we can do now is like we can actually generate scripts on the fly, and not just generate scripts, but have tests. And if you know how to read a good test, you can tell whether the test is good or not. Are you finding yourself generating more scripts on the fly and then committing those versus bringing in dependencies?
Well, that's true. Absolutely, yeah. A bunch of scripts are basically just being generated, and that's true.
It does sound like you're spending a lot of time setting everything up and maintaining things, right? I mean, no?
When I started with a lot of the tooling at work, like over a year ago, I was. Now, because I have so many I have like optimized skills around basic code patterns given the language I'm using, and how I want tests to be generated, rules around that. I am able to move from project to project, bring my skills with me, bring my user prompt hooks with me, and then what's happening is that like the rules around how to use GH properly, preferencing using generating scripts over pulling in external dependencies, so they actually have rules around that too. That works, and then I already have rules around how to generate tests being exhaustive, not making sure there are absolutely no conditionals in my test, and other rules. I find that has actually made my work better. Even rules around how to use Zod for runtime validation, which is a thing, on server side works just fine. Having those rules set up and like thinking about glue that project to project because they're just markdown files or like CLI utilities I built has made it so that I could jump into a new project. Like I just working on an X402, the new crypto USD payment system. I was able to just take everything I had in one project, immediately jump into our services repo, and start running with that by giving references to the documentation, and built it just fine.
How many team of people do you collaborate with in your team?
Exactly what I was going to ask.
So the DX team has 3 former mobile engineers who have now moved into working in DX across different languages. So I salute them for being able to jump into Python and TypeScript so quickly. And that's like the team I work with on like our open source front-facing stuff. But I also work for a data science team that works. So I work with 2 data scientists, Eddie and Zaira, on the DS team. I work with another data analyst who's on a different team that's data related in regards to our metrics. And so he's tracking every time I release a new open source tool that has a new integration, work with him to track how that's working. So I'm inside Databricks with that a lot. Then I also work with our platform solutions team on building like background agents, which we're still working on. And then I also work with our front end team every now and again. I maintain like our file upload system. And then I work with our forward deployed engineers. There's 2 of those guys. And that's actually just a team of like 5 people. I worked with 2 of them on building integrations for our actual custom integrations for clients. So my job has to be working across different teams, so most we don't remember what team I'm on. So usually on any given day, I'm working with like 3 different teams, usually 5 to 7 different engineers, not counting salespeople, product owners, and the guy who runs our product.
Yeah, I think, I think maybe a point that is kind of interesting in that as well is like, how do you manage, since you build so many custom workflows, and I love custom workflows, I love it. I just found it difficult sometimes to make other people understand them when I crash them. And since you have so much automation built in already, do they just use your skills? Do they use your SD pipelines, or do you find success in making them use those as well?
Yeah, so I came up as a front-end engineer working on design systems. And if you've ever had to work on a design system, it's like herding cats. And so you get really good at communicating and teaching people how to use your tools that you build. And so I've been building big tools for front-end engineers for over a decade. And I found that the easiest thing is like the agents and agentic development has made it a lot easier. And so, yeah, there are skills that I build that are like public-facing for like integrating our APIs and things. But for every single project I work on, for every single feature I work on, I capture what I do in either rules that are in an agent's MD file or in skills, and then I have rules around reflecting and improving that. And then I teach my own team how they work, and I teach them how to do that. Like whether it's like how to use this to like track your Git commits, use the agent to make that, so you then generate your blog articles later for our dev, rel, and DX team, so that they're able to write and capture what they're doing more, not just for internal uses, but for public usage. How to manage their linear tickets by making use of the linear MCP server, how to work with Notion to use all this stuff. Like, I'm out there evangelizing and teaching it, but I'm also like going on and teaching other teams so that when any engineer at my company, whether they're using Claude Code, whether they're using Cursor or another agent, agentic IDE drops into one of my repos, they can immediately open it up in the README and says like, hey, you're using the easiest way to use this is use agentic IDE and just ask about this feature. Use this skill. I put that in every single README for every single project I work on. I immediately describe what the skills are available to them. And then it's my job as the maintainer of these different repos to like do that, but also my job to like, when someone's contributing to it, to guide them in doing this. So like recently I had 2 engineers to contribute to our LangChain skill, and they were easily able to contribute to it and get our skill evaluation suite, which does elements of judge running, simply by running the skill for like, I want to add a new skill. And then they were to identify one problem and fix it.
Thanks, Edward. We're actually a little over time on I'm enjoying this conversation, like you keep going, but I wanted to leave it open for some questions from the audience. So maybe we see if anybody has any questions out there. Just raise your hand and Roland can help.
Meanwhile, we can also talk a little bit about open source. Still, we can touch on that.
Sure.
Yeah. Maybe you want to explain to us why did you open source that tool? I think we have some big open source attributes here, right? There's one open source scientist. We're at CodeRabbit, we love open source too. We support a lot of open source projects, so we'd love to learn a bit more about your decision on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm Rod. I've been working on AI for a while. you were here. Android is actually work for us, and yeah, actually design a lot of the code secret. So it's actually he's actually very interested. I've been working on AI for what 2 years now, 3 years now. This feels like one eternity, but very yeah. But
The open source decision? Why open source?
I am so happy we're open source now. You have real idea. You know, it's fun working on a closed source, project, but with open source, we can really, expand it, get new ideas, breathe new life into it, really, we support. So I'm so excited about the open source initiative. And then also being members of the, Linux Foundation and the AAIF, the Agentic AI Foundation, which is really exciting too. So I'm stoked with it.
I'll just add, to your question, Hedry, I think we're trying to build developer tools, and the best way to get developers to use your developer tools is to open source.
I build what I wanted to do. That's perfect. Because I'm a developer. Everybody always asks me, and they come to global G use this. Of course I use. I built it. Yes, so it's like.
So if there's no questions, I have a final question. So anybody? No?
Don't be shy, guys. Right here? Okay.
Yeah, I have a question about multiple agents doing coding. How have you guys handled the repo push and even from snacks, stepping all over each other? Edward, maybe you can start with you and Andrew have like 3 minutes or 3.
Locally, get work trees, and functionally, actually using plans, use a tool called Sidecar now to help my plans, and splitting that into smaller, having the agents, spin up sub-agents split into smaller commits that are actually scoped to particular features or paths.
So when you're using work tree, you still have to resolve the conflicts that they're working on the same agent or same file, or how do you deal with that?
So this comes back to how you structure your project. So like I have like style rules, things that people argue about all the time about like this feature this is going in this folder, this is going in that folder. And so I don't run into that very often. And I'm usually planning out, I will spend a day for like actual novel work, a day or even a week, actually planning out, thinking about the design and architecture before I even get around to like spinning up an agent to like begin orchestrating multiple work trees to build out different parts of that very large, usually multiple features. But I tell them, well, like, spend more time on your planning, your system design, work on generating that document, because then once you have that, you can beat that to almost any model, any coding agent, and it will spin it up and build it for you in small, digestible work trees that you can actually then move into smaller branch commits and progressively go through each one to review and let your coworkers review that. So like I did that, finished one of those earlier today for like a OAuth for MCP solution.
I have a great tool tip for you. We have a tool that we call Git2Tree Runner and CodeRabbit. It's open source, has about 1,000 stars. It's really great for that. I think progressive work trees where you kind of feature and then just submit PR once it at a certain phase that's completed that you move on is a good way. If you really do what I was just talking about, which is doing a PRD, real PRD design on our project requirements design documents, then I think you can also split it up into parallel agents working on separate parts. But I spend a lot of time thinking about, okay, if I want to, let's say I run 6 to 8 Claude code and code sessions in parallel, what are my agent swarms that I have basically at my terminal going to work on, and how do I split that up so that it makes sense that they don't overlap, yet you still find yourself with merge conflicts every now and then. And then there's other tools around that as well that we built at a CodeRabbit as well, merge conflict resolvers. But ultimately, it really comes down to your design. I think that's the most crucial tip at the start.
Just wanted to add one thing about open sourcing. The advantage of open sourcing, not just for buildings, now it's visible by the agents, right? So now you can unleash all these architectures on this code base. So I think now it's totally obvious open source is going to win, right? Because you can sit inside with a little proprietary closed source island, and then you have whatever limited set of tools you have in your company to to bring to bear. But now in open source repo, you can bring to bear more and try all kind of stuff on it, right? And that's can run parallel and improvements can happen very quickly. So I think there is like a force multiplier now, right? They making it visible to developers, you're making it visible to agents, right? And now it becomes this part of self-perpetuate the systems. Congratulations.
That's a great point.
So they're brave for all. I think it's a beautiful initiative because also now it's the new way of coders, by coders or engineers that might have not been software engineers, but now become software engineers through the power of AI. They really have more access and understanding of contributing to what you're doing. And I think that's really great. And then next to it, like you said as well, I think open source is a beautiful thing that empowers a lot of the things, and now you're part of it. So that's great.
I have a question for both of you, actually. So either one of you can answer this. And wherever, open source, I'm a big fan, I love it. But I remember submitting a PR yesterday to OpenClaw because my CEO asked me to. It was fun. But as I was sitting there doing this, I'm looking at it, the AI code to be done back and forth, and we're having a discussion. And I'm thinking, how are you looking to handle getting hit with a massive amount of like agent PRs when your product, which I'm looking forward to seeing the demo for, takes off? And on the other side, I love CodeRabbit's product. I evaluated for my job. We decided to go with a different thing, but I personally like it. Sorry, that was me. But what are you doing? When you're thinking about building these products, you're often like building it for like developers. Everything, the things you mentioned are very much like human usage. How are you thinking about building tools that are going to assist with like the way the agent-based PRs are coming into open source projects?
Yeah, and I can talk to that because I run a podcast for a lot of open source tooling inside CodeRabbit as well, and we use a bunch of really great open source tools inside of CodeRabbit as well, actually. And some of them you might heard about. One of them, for example, is Mastra, which is the TypeScript agentic frameworks. When taking off, I think it's at 2 million downloads per month now or something, so crazy. And now with that, and Abi, the founder of my podcast, so they get a lot of PRs too, just like Peter Steinkirk does for OpenDry. And the way is really, the narrative is shaken because code is now kind of for free because as long as you have a $200 subscription, we can generate a PR. So what now matters most is your engagement with the project. So if you are there, if you understand, you pick up an actual issue that has been ranked up and you submit PR for that, it's going to be different than just building something for yourself that you got to use. You are active in the Discord community. They say everything else. For example, Abi, they closed out beat it. They don't bid it. So.
So I think, the architecture that we put into the open source today is very modular, and where you add the functionality is not being mindful necessarily, although you can change the framework. Where you really want the functionality, how it is at the node level. So, if you want to add a node to, talk to Google, object recognition. Then and that's where the power of the abstract APIs come out, is that you're isolated, you basically have a sandbox, but you can do whatever you want in that sandbox and hook it up to other components around you, right? And work within an existing pipeline. So you may have, 30 components in your pipeline. You may have one custom component that you need, but you don't have to worry about the other 30. You just have to worry about the one piece of functionality that you want to have. So when you want that, you have one of two options. You can either keep it for yourself and run it for yourself, or you can issue as a PR. And if it follows the specifications of the node and our interfaces, boom, it's in there. Because the success of this product is really on the number of nodes and how we can connect things and how we can process data in very different ways and very different ideas from very different people on how to accomplish those different tasks. It's like, an engineer came up to me a few weeks ago and said, okay, I've got this great node and it does this and this and this and this and this. And it's like, no, create a node that does this, create a node that does this, create a node that does this, and then we can actually pull them all together and use them in very different ways. So
And on that note, I'll just answer your question two ways. One is probably some agentic code review. And number two, I really look forward to having that problem. Yeah. All right, so we've wrapped up our panel section. Thank you guys very much.
There's one more
Appreciate
question.
it.
There's one more question. Is that okay?
Oh.
Can we just have one more question?
Okay, sure.
Yeah.
I'm actually just curious to see, like, you know, with the rates of just source generation nowadays with AI and how it's increasingly becoming like another layer of abstraction, like, where do your eyes physically go to nowadays? Like, are you actually looking at source or the output, especially like Edward? Like, it seems like you really take, like, I'd say like a scientific approach where you're almost analyzing, you know, the output and the result and comparing that, you know, to, you know, some kind of hypothesis, right? So yeah, so like, what's the ratio you say, you know, is it the terminal output, is it source, etc.? I'm just curious.
For me, if it's a feature that I am intimately familiar with, I'm gonna probably be looking at the actual source code. But I've had to like build better tools for certain features now that really evaluate in ways that that aren't just pure deterministic tests. And I'm having to trust those more and more because there's my question about like AI PRs is like, there's just too much stuff that's happening. Even internally, our developers are using agentic coding more. So I'm just getting hit with PRs. I'm like, I can say, oh, let's write, or I can build tools that evaluate the outputs and make sure we have tools in there for scanning things, and probably eventually convince them to like maybe get better PR review tools in Claude Code and Cursor, like CodeRabbit, to actually really assess things more than what our current SendGrep and Danger files can do.
I think we were in, that was good. Yeah. Did you answer your question? Okay. So thank you guys very much. Appreciate it.